Hey ladies and gentlemen, my name is Indy Pride, and this fine October evening I wanted to talk a little bit about Vermintide and the future of this game series. For those who don't know, Vermintide is a first-person shooter with a melee focus set in the Warhammer universe during the end times, where hordes of the fuzzy little rat men we all know and love called Skaven ascend from beneath the Empire and start causing just a teeny bit of mischief, like building screaming bells that drive entire populations insane, and participating in the wholesale slaughter of tens of thousands of innocents. Nothing too drastic, it's just a prank, bro. But Vermintide has been out on PC for almost a year, and with the console release on Xbox One and PS4 coming tonight, thought it might be fun to get some gameplay, introduce the game to those of you who have not seen it before, and discuss what kind of content we'd like to see going forward. If you're looking for a game to compare it to, Vermintide is basically Left 4 Dead set in a fantasy universe. It borrows heavily from the mechanics and gameplay of the Left 4 Dead series, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Instead of zombies, you have Skaven. Instead of tanks and smokers and undead specials, you've got rat ogres, clan molder packmasters, Eshin assassins, poison wind globadiers, and rattling gunners. There are 5 characters to choose from: a dwarf warrior, a bright wizard, a witch hunter, a wood elf waywatcher, and an empire soldier. Each have their own playstyle and weapons. As you can imagine, the wood elf excels at range combat and sniping specials, but also has access to quick melee weapons and the fastest block run move speed in the game, while the dwarf on the other hand has serious crowd control and armor piercing capabilities with shield combos that can keep entire waves of slaves and clan rats in check. But for the most part, each character can fulfill a variety of different roles depending on the weapons you bring, and it's very much advised to bring a versatile setup so you can deal with any threat that comes about. For example, my favorite character in the game is Barden Gorkson the dwarf, and his axe and shield combo is, in my opinion, one of the best in the game. The axe has armor piercing on normal attacks, so it can behead storm vermin and other armored enemies, and his shield bash is one of the fastest charge attacks in the game, allowing you to stun lock and damage huge crowds of clan and slave rats. For ranged weapons, the handgun is generally speaking the ideal pick for Empire Soldier and Dwarf players because they can one-shot special Skaven units like the Rattling Gunner and are very accurate, but I don't have the fast reload or other awesome traits I want on my exotic Dwarf handgun, so I use the Grudge Raker a lot of the time, which is a shotgun with decent range that excels at eliminating ambient trash. These are the clan rats that scattered throughout the level, and it can also cut through huge holes through Skaven swarms. It can also 1 or 2 shot globadiers or packmasters, which is, as you can imagine, very useful. You select different missions, and if you manage to complete a run, at the end you get new weapons and trinkets to equip your characters with. The melee focus of the game is incredibly satisfying. Great swords and axes behead and dismember, slicing slaves in half and blood just spattering your screen. And now, one of the most satisfying and also frustrating things about Vermintide is its difficulty. It is legitimately one of the more challenging games I've ever played, which you don't typically associate with a hack and slash game like this, but the combat system is deceptively simple. There's a lot of nuance and skill and movement, positioning, and blocking that lies behind the simple click, click, click of that left mouse button. Even on lower difficulties, specials and hordes can combine in brutal ways. When you first face off against a rat ogre, at the same time an ambush horn is blown, and swarms of slaves descend upon you, there is a palpable sense of dread punctuated by a mad scramble for survival. And getting out of those situations alive is incredibly satisfying. Teamwork in Vermintide is super important. I really can't stress that enough, especially with the way special enemies are implemented. Like a Packmaster, for example, can easily run through the middle of a slave horde and hook an ally and drag them away from your team into the teeth of dozens of rabid rats. If you get separated from your team on a long run and get jumped by an Eshin assassin, you can't save yourself at all. Once it begins its animation, it'll just start plunging its warpstone daggers into you over and over, and your teammates will have to save you, or you'll go from full health to 0 in just a few seconds. And dealing with hordes can be simple when you're all together, creating a tornado of sharp weaponry that Skaven can't hope to assail, but as soon as a teammate is separated or killed, it becomes much easier for hordes to surround and overwhelm you, wearing down your block stamina and chunking away health until you're overrun. And you'll definitely notice that if you're playing and 2 of your teammates die, and now there are only 2 of you left, you get overrun much more easily when you're missing 2 of your teammates. Storm Vermin patrols can be legitimate threats to your team's survival. They're not just there for show. I've had some very tense moments where 12 of these huge, heavily armored, elite halberd warriors pass within a few feet of the group, and then you get sniffed out and discovered, and things get really scary really fast. On top of all of that, you add Nightmare and Cataclysm difficulties, on top of the inherently challenging nature of the game, where a hit from a Storm Vermin halberd can take away half of your HP, or even one-shot you in a single stroke, and then further it with a gameplay mechanic utilizing Skaven Grimoires, which reduce your max health significantly for the entirety of the run, in exchange for higher probabilities of dropping rare weapons, and you have a truly difficult game to master. But that's also why it can feel so rewarding. Playing the last 5 minutes of a mission like the enemy below, as Clan Fester literally descends on your heads, and you run for your lives as the cavern caves in around you, and then unlocking a cool weapon at the end of the run, that is a very rewarding feeling, and it encourages more playtime. The game is also gorgeous, especially the lighting in this game. It is beautiful. Morslib hangs overhead with an eerie green glow, and although the game is dark and gritty, this helps amplify all the rich and bright colors that occur when, for example, a Rattling Gunner opens fire, or Sienna the Bright Wizard summons flame to roast a bunch of Ratmen. Now the game certainly has its share of issues. Still has plenty of bugs a year on. I just played a Horn of Magnus run where the stairs that lead up to the rooftops before the conclusion of the level just straight up disappeared. Like that part of the map was just gone, so people couldn't advance past that part unless they quit and rejoined, in which case that part of the map would load in correctly. Doesn't happen very often, but I have seen a lot of weird stuff like that. There are skateboarding Rattling Gunners sometimes who zoom around the map occasionally. They're supposed to be very immobile, but you'll hit them with like a Hagbane bow, and they'll start skating around the map, shooting like crazy machine gun fire, and Rat Ogres and other units frequently get stuck in parts of the map and just can't move. And then there's the loot system. This has been most people's biggest gripe with the game since day one. On one hand, the loot system gives you a reason to continue playing and grinding and beating levels. And from that standpoint, it is a very good thing. Dropping an exotic quality weapon with awesome traits is just a rewarding feeling and makes you feel like that crazy hard nightmare run where you barely crawled to victory was all worth it. The problem is that the entire system is basically based on RNG, and no one likes something that is entirely based on RNG. It's generally speaking not the best way to create a gameplay mechanic, and a lot of the systems they've implemented to try and combat that frustrating aspect just don't work all that well. For example, there are people who have played 10, 20, or 30 hours on the Drakenfels DLC and have never ever seen the Waywatcher glaive weapon in their loot tabletop, or their loot table after a match, much less rolled the correct amount of die to actually drop that weapon. There is no way to barter a duplicate of a more rare weapon you drop in post-game and replace it with a lower level weapon that you actually want. So for example, if I got an orange handgun but it's a duplicate, I can't give that rare quality weapon up to get a green or blue less rare weapon that's on the same loot table that I do want. I've gone into the forge and salvaged a bunch of duplicate weapons for tokens that can purchase new weapons, and literally dropped the same 4 weapons that I had just salvaged when I purchased new gear. In 100 hours, I've literally seen Drakefire pistols only once for the dwarf in my post-game loot table. So all that stuff, as you can imagine, can get very frustrating when you played a bunch of hours on the game and you're not dropping the weapons you want. That gets really annoying. There are just so many things that come with the RNG system that make the loot less fun, and these should be your rewards. And while it should indeed be difficult to unlock top tier weapons, at the end of the day there comes a point where you've put so many hours in and you're never getting the gear you want, that's going to inevitably lead to frustration. Now, Fat Shark is addressing this. They are releasing a free Quests and Contracts DLC coming this October that's supposed to alleviate some or all of these issues, but that's literally coming a year after the game first launched. That's a long time to wait for fixes to such common complaints, and these are pretty common. If you go to Fat Shark forums or Vermintide Reddit, you'll see those issues are brought up a lot. Now, to be fair, Fat Shark is a small developer, so rolling out new content simply takes them longer than some other bigger game developers, and the last few months I'm sure have been almost entirely dedicated towards making the console release go as smoothly as possible. But now that the console versions are ready for launch, let's talk about what kinds of content would be a great addition to Vermintide as the game moves forward. So, in my mind, setting and atmosphere are first and foremost. They're the thing I think of when I think about Vermintide and ways to improve it. I will say Vermintide does an excellent job in their art direction and music and map design, which all combine to make you feel like you're in the Warhammer universe. The sounds of rat paws on cobblestone, of rattling gunners winding up to fire, the great, and I do mean fantastic soundtrack that kicks in when a Skaven horn blows and storm vermin patrols discover you and move in to engage, and even the buildings and character models themselves all do a stellar job of immersing you in the Warhammer universe and making you feel like you're in an Empire city under attack. One of my biggest gripes with the game, though, is that because the entire game is centered around Uberstrike and the depths beneath it, a lot of the different levels look and play very similarly. There isn't a massive amount of visual variation between the Horn of Magnus run and Supply and Demand, for example. Those are two of the missions in the game. And it makes sense, of course, you're in the same Empire City. There's no real passage of time, as each mission is presumably played out only a few days or weeks apart from each other, but this means that visual variation on levels is a bit lacking. Even with the Drakenfels DLC, you will end up going into a dark, dreary castle, not very different than the dark streets and buildings you've been running through in your previous runs on Uberstrike. There are some great set pieces like the massive Vampire Lord statue pouring a waterfall of blood down the mouth and chest, and the gargoyles standing watch over pools of blood, but the majority of these runs aren't going to blow you away in terms of visual variety. So what I'm saying is, Vermintide needs a change of scenery, and there is a massive, expansive universe to draw inspiration from in terms of characters and a place for a new campaign. New characters and new missions are a must at this point. There has to be new content that, instead of improving the original game, which of course is also important, there need to be things alongside that that move it to a different location with new characters, new missions, new maps. And there's so much stuff Fat Shark could do. Personally, and I bet a lot of you guys can agree with this one because Lizardmen are so popular, I think a Lizardmen campaign in Lustria against Clan Pestilence could be absolutely amazing. Dense Lustrian jungles, Aztec-inspired temples, plague monks, and censure bears swarming the temple cities could make for some absolutely breathtaking scenery and interesting gameplay. Add a Saurus Temple Guard character and a Skink Priest character. Add a couple new unique specials like a Plague Monk with damage over time weapons and a beefy health pool. And allow Carillion, Barden, and the gang from the original Vermintide to come over and play with all of their weapons in Lustria. And you've got the makings of an absolutely epic DLC expansion that will probably sell like hotcakes. And I'm pretty sure I can count on one hand the amount of games Lizardmen have ever been available in and playable in, and certainly never in anything as engaging, visceral, and Warhammery as Vermintide. So, for such a popular race with such a unique aesthetic, I think it fits like a glove. It fits perfectly. So in terms of weapons and new characters, what could we add to such a DLC? Well, one of the weapons lizardmen are famous for using is taken directly from Aztec culture, I believe. It's a huge war club with obsidian stones lining each edge called a maquidal. A maquidal and shield combo, a two-handed maquidal, a long spear, and a halberd could all be really cool looking and interesting weapons for a temple guard character. And a skink could be a skirmisher with access to poison blowpipes and good range weaponry with assorted hand weapons, or it could be a skink priest variant with Lore of Heavens or Lore of Beasts. Now, how that magic would translate directly into Vermintide is perhaps a bit more tricky than the Lore of Fire with the Bright Wizard we already have, but at the same time, magic missiles and buffing and supporting allies in a similar way to strength and speed potions, which are already in the game, could be really cool. There's currently no real support character in Vermintide who is weak in melee but can actually buff allies, and that could be a fun role that FactShark might explore. I definitely want more in-depth cosmetic customization. The game has hats, and some of them are actually really cool looking, but being able to change around your armor and clothing and colors a bit would be nice and make the whole experience feel a bit more personal. This is not really a serious gripe, especially given the original game's predictably small budget, but you can clearly tell FatShark was trying to save money on assets that could have helped make Uberstrike and other locations feel more alive. This is really conspicuous on maps like the Horn of Magnus, where you're walking through a big section of the city and don't ever see a single living NPC or civilian, even though the attack has literally just begun, and at that point there would presumably be thousands of people running for their lives. The only hint there is any human life in the city at all are the dead people on the ground and the cannon fire and bells ringing in the background near the end of the level, and it's really noticeable. This kind of sounds like a nitpick, but if their budget expands, fleshing out the surrounding area with events like exploding homes or screaming civilians, just things that make the area feel like a living, breathing, habitable place, all that could be a really nice touch. With a universe as expansive as Warhammer, though, there's so much that can be drawn on for inspiration, and that's what makes me excited for Vermintide as we move forward. Because at the end of the White Rat mission in Vermintide, there is a cinematic that hints at the undead hordes of Sylvania and the tides of Chaos Warriors and Beastmen that are approaching the Empire. So the future of Vermintide doesn't even necessarily have to be only about Skaven. I can definitely see potential in fighting Minotaurs and Champions of Khorne deep in the Chaos Wastes, or skeletons and raised zombies and Vargul special monsters in a snowy mountain graveyard or torrential rain in the heart of Sylvania. The world is their oyster, and they've made it clear that they will be making additional content, and from what I understand, the game sold well above expectations, which should help out on that front considerably, and it does make me think that there are so many options they could choose from in a Warhammer setting that would be incredibly fun to play and make Vermintide amazing going forward. I'm sincerely hoping that the quests and contracts free DLC alleviates some of the loot issues currently plaguing Vermintide and allows you to set goals and accomplish missions in working towards specific weapons that you want instead of relying solely on RNG. And I'm hoping that as the game moves forward, we get some great variety in terms of playable areas and characters with different playstyles and weapons to choose from. The core gameplay in Vermintide is awesome and addicting, and it's one of those games that I really hope continues to build on its success and expand into something phenomenal. And I think that it absolutely has the potential to do that. It's been really fun so far. I mean, I've obviously had the game for a year and been playing it off and on, but just recently got back into it and decided to make this video because finally the team at FatShark will be able to move back towards the PC side of things because everything's caught up on the console front. Actually, at this point, it's released tonight. But yeah, and this style of gameplay is also getting me excited for stuff like Space Hulk Deathwing, which will be a similar kind of gameplay style, obviously with 40k weaponry and Terminator armor and that kind of thing, which should be releasing in November, and we won't be fighting Skaven there, we'll be fighting Tyranid Swarms, but if it's any good, I will very likely be covering that as well. But in conclusion, I definitely recommend you guys checking out Vermintide if you haven't already. It's definitely worth the purchase, I feel. I haven't checked it on Steam, what the price is, but I would imagine the price has fallen somewhat, and it wasn't a full price game when it came out anyway. So it's definitely worth the price, I feel. It's a very solid co-op experience, and it's just a good looking, satisfying, and rewarding game that you can sink a lot of hours into, despite its flaws. So what kind of DLC or future content would you guys like to see in future sequels or expansions? Let me know in the comment section, and I will talk to you all very soon. Have a good one.